Hello and welcome in, everybody. Today we'll be taking a look at another indie space sim game by a single developer called Reentry, a spaceflight simulator. While Starship Simulator, the other game that I've done some videos on, is set in a sci-fi future, Reentry is set in the historical past. This, of course, made me very interested because I happen to love recreating history through video games. Being able to experience times and events for yourself is far more engaging than simply reading about it. Even if it only gives you a flavor of being there yourself, an emotional attachment is often the starting point for wanting to take a deeper dive into the subject. So, here we have a game set in the 1960s and 70s that aims to recreate the spacecraft and missions of NASA in the early days of spaceflight. It is what I call a checklist sim, so it's very technically in-depth and aims to create study-level spacecraft. Realistic orbital mechanics are used in flight, and real systems are recreated with complex electrical and mechanical systems on board the spacecraft. Missions can also be set with random failures to occur as well, testing critical thinking and your system's knowledge. A mission may not even make it into space if a failure needs an abort to be called. Manuals are provided for each individual program, which is nice, covering Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. This is a single developer game, created and programmed by Petri Wilhemsen out of Norway. The game has been around for some years now, having gone into early access in 2018, so is perhaps more well known than something newer like Starship Sim. The game appears to be similar to, or at least in the same genre of, a much older game called Orbiter, though I don't have any personal experience with that. I only discovered this game fairly recently, maybe in the last 6 months or so, and finally bought it last week to give it a try. If you're already familiar with this game, or with Orbiter, or just this particular bit of the genre as a whole, then you probably already know more about it than I do. But if this is new to you and sounds interesting, this video will give a basic overview of what the game offers and how it works. What I'm really interested in is presenting the historical missions in a series that are provided in the game. But I decided to make an overview first that just introduces the game overall. Niche indie games like this one often gain interest through word of mouth, or in this case, word of video. I know I only found this game, and some others like it recently, through someone's random videos on YouTube, so I like to try to pay that forward with games that I really enjoy or that I find really interesting, because others might find it in the same way through me, and then be really happy they did. So that is my primary objective here, is just to do an overview of the game, and to just help with the algorithm a little bit and get some more videos circulating for the game. So let's get going and dive into what we have here. So here on the main menu, we can see how the game is broken up into activities. We can begin with a fairly simple profile creator, where you put in your astronaut's name and what you would want to name your capsule. You can also designate a path to a custom insignia, so if you have some sort of graphic that you want to put on your capsule, either you make it yourself or you can acquire it from elsewhere, you can then direct the game here to paste it onto the side of the ship. There's also a very basic character editor, which is mainly used for the co-op or the multiplayer interactions in Mission Control, which we'll get to shortly. And then tells you your overall space time. You can see I've got 6 hours and 15 minutes, and multiplayer rankings, which I have not engaged in at all. So it also shows you what qualifications you have, which at the moment, for me, is only the Mercury pilot. Let's see. So there's 4 main campaigns and over 50 training missions to go through. That's not including any of the missions that you can program yourself. So here's the Academy, and this is where it's recommended that you start. This is where I started. We can open up the manual. We can open up the web, which brings us to the Reentry site. And this is where you can download all of the manuals. So you have a basic game manual, so this goes through the game itself. The flight manuals specifically for each programmer here and can be downloaded. So there's Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and the lunar module has its own flight manual. Additionally, again, for those co-op missions, you've got mission control manuals. So for both the Mercury and then the Apollo mission controls, this provides additional information for being able to play with friends online. If you're more of a visual learner, they have YouTube videos available that you can link to and be able to watch things like procedures and familiarizing yourself with the capsules. But here's the lessons themselves, which take you through essentially all of these phases of flight. So what I've seen, at least so far, lesson 1 is always a pre-launch. So that is an introduction to whatever capsule you're in. Usually has you go through the startup sequence from cold and dark, talks to you a little bit about the program maybe, and then terminates well before a launch ever happens. Lesson 2, launch and descent, talking about checklists. In this case, it's speaking about the Atlas rocket as well. In the Mercury program, 2 main rockets were used, so you do a couple of different flights depending on what booster you're on. Here's the electrical system, etc., etc., finally culminating in a full mission, which they call an exam here. And so basically, once you do this, you become qualified on that spacecraft. And if we go to career, in fact, this allows us to basically see a visual roadmap of all of the missions available in the game. Not all the missions, I shouldn't say that, but well, let's just take a look at it. So for Mercury, which this is the one I have done, so you begin here, you have 2 branches. You have the actual pilot branch, and then you've got the controller branch. So you can see complete all Academy lessons, including the final exam. You get check marks for that, so then you become qualified. Here's Tier 2. And then it's got the 5 campaign missions. If you click on these, this will actually bring you to the same place in the main menu as if you had clicked on the mission. So it's just a different way to get to the same thing. But this helps you keep the story a little more linear, I think, and visually linear, because you're following the tech tree kind of setup. But here it tells you about the actual historical relevance of each mission. So it comes with illustrations, some graphics, all this background. It tells you what to expect in these and what you should complete first. It tells you about making sure that you've completed the Academy missions for this particular spacecraft so that you're well acquainted with it. And then it starts listing all of the actual missions, and so this is how you select them. If you're back on the main menu, it's the same thing as hitting campaigns. Campaign 1, Orbital Survival. This brings you back to the same page. As you complete each mission, it will unlock the next one in line. So, for example, Campaign 2, which I have not completed, you can see only has 1 mission. So I would click on this, press launch, and then I would have to complete that mission to unlock the next ones in line. So again, keeping it nice and linear, and you feel like you are actually progressing through time. However, those are not the only options you have for missions, because I should point out that actually these missions here that are in these campaigns, these are based on real mission profiles, but are not exact recreations of the historical missions, because that's a separate set. These are your pilot as you going through the steps to complete these programs. But if you go to missions, Project Mercury, you have a free play option. You can create free missions or free play missions, and here they are as a cold and dark. So these missions start you 90 minutes prior to blast off and requires you to do the full checklist from cold and dark up until, well, splashdown actually. So these are the long ones. These start you, I think, maybe 15 minutes before. And there is a handy time compression system, so you can sort of cruise through some of these long blocks of time without having to wait in real time for 90 minutes to go by. So that's free play. Below that is scenarios. These are, again, like the campaign missions, realistic in-game missions that are based on the real profiles, but are not following any specific mission. And now here, these are the actual historic missions recreated. And these are really cool. So you select these, it tells you exactly what the objectives were of that particular mission, and then what the flight plan was. So this is a nice way to sort of to follow along with what's going on, or what would have been going on in the real mission when you're hearing the radio communications in game. Now this one's pretty easy because this is Redstone 3. This was popping up, doing a few checks on the controls, and then splashdown, essentially. But here it tells you, it shows you like what exactly to expect and what the timing of everything is and what's going on, and then gives you mission details about background, what was actually happening. It talks about delays that happened on the day prior to the actual launch and things like that. So that's a pretty simple one. But if you go to even something like Mercury Atlas 6, now this was John Glenn's 3-orbit mission, and they had him busy the whole time, and it sort of gets overwhelming if you don't really know what's going on, because they have him doing all sorts of things like switching radios around, doing 30-minute reports, doing different yaw maneuvers, doing medical tests. He's up there doing vision tests with his eyes, working a bungee cord to do some strenuous exercise, taking blood pressure. There's actually a little blood pressure taking button in the capsule that you have to click on and things like that. So a really complex mission like this, it's kind of nice just to actually do a pre-mission briefing and to be aware of what's going on. Oh, here we go. Yeah, 1 hour 12 minutes, first meal. So they're like, can you eat in space? We don't know. We need to test that. So that was some of the things that these early astronauts had to figure out. And these missions are really cool because they play the actual audio recordings from the mission. And they're somewhat interactive. Sometimes they'll pause and then require you to manipulate a switch or a knob, and then it waits for you to make that action, and then it continues with the audio. So you will hear the pilot speaking as you are doing things, and so it all makes sense, and that's really, really cool. That's the interactive historical part that I really dig. So that's the meat of the game. From the main menu, I suppose we could jump into just one scenario real quick, just to show the mechanics of actually working the game. So why don't we just do a free play? Let's do a Redstone Cold and Dark. And we won't go through the whole mission, but I just want to sit in the capsule and be able to look at a few things here and there. All right, so here we are in the Mercury capsule, atop the Redstone booster, sitting on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. We can go to an external view. And here is the tower facility, the launch facility, with our little capsule here. This is the forward observation windscreen that we see, and then you remember I said that you can put in your own name and number of your capsule, so here's mine, Challenger 7. Alternately, if you take that out and you opt for one of those graphics icons, this is where it'll paste it right here along the top of the ship. There's the Redstone booster. This is the emergency escape system, which was a series of rockets which would lift the entire capsule clear of the booster and then auto-deploy parachutes. Here is Cape Canaveral. Here's other launching facilities, other launch pads down to the south, I think that would be. So not super high fidelity here at the moment, but again, that could improve later. That's okay. I don't find that to be the end of the world. If you press the V button, this is a very nice, handy view selector. Again, external. Orbital only kicks in once you're actually in orbit. But here's commander seat, left panels, right panels, upper panels, the window itself. navigation reticle, which we don't have at the moment. These are also the F keys. So like F5 is going to be your center seat, F6 brings you down to the left, F7 to the right, etc., etc. Now I am using track IR, so all of my head rotations and movements are translated into the game. So I actually don't use the moving cameras all that much. But if you're not using something like track IR or any of the other head movement systems, normally you scroll around by holding down the middle mouse button, and you can zoom in and out with the wheel, and then you can go through the different cameras in order to look at stuff a little bit easier. So you don't have to have some crazy fancy system like this in order to play. It just really helps with immersion if you do. Right, so up here it gives us the date. It says it's Monday, July 10th, 1961. It's 8:34 a.m. Time to launch, 1 hour 25 minutes. So we began at T-minus 90. So the first step would be to power up this module and go through all the initial checks. And that's where our checklists come in. Like I said, this is a checklist sim. And all of these systems are modeled internally, the electrical systems especially. The Mercury capsule is actually very simple comparatively, but even the next step, the Gemini capsule, becomes much more complex. And then of course Apollo is extremely complex when it comes to managing your electrical systems and troubleshooting items that happen. But checklists, I wanted to get back to that. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. I showed you can go download the manuals from the website. So you can do a couple of things. You could either print out that manual and have it in front of you, traditional flight sim style, or if you have a second monitor, you can put the PDF up on that monitor and then you have it referenced up there. Or the third option is to run through the checklists in-game. And this game has a really nice system for that. It's definitely an improvement on something like the Microsoft Flight Sim onboard checklist system, which can be a little clunky here. So if you press M, this brings up our mission plan. This gives us several tabs we can look at. Tells us about the mission, what the briefing would be. In this case, it says no assignment, enjoy your flight, because it's just a simple one. Here is the map. The orbital, or not the orbital map, but the ground station map. Transcript just lets you see everything that has been said. Sometimes there's a lot of communications coming at you fast. This allows you to just be able to review anything that was said. And also, notes, which is nice, because it allows you to just write in anything you need. There's no format or anything. It's literally just quick notes if you need to jot something down. But checklists is why I brought us here in the first place. And so here's all of the available checklists. These are all clickable. So we'll go to flight mode, fly-by-wire mode. So here is the checklist, right? As it is written. It gives you the steps. Okay, that's pretty standard. Like, this is looking like a Microsoft Flight Sim or other games at this point. But here's the really nice thing, is you don't have to keep this window up, because obviously it gets in the way. You maybe can't see things, especially if you don't have the track IR. Then you're sort of stuck in one position, and not being able to see could be a real pain. So if you click on Run, it actually puts the checklist up here, and that does two things. One, it gets it out of the way, you can still see it, and you can interact with it. But two, it has now activated that checklist, and now begins to show us highlighted switches here in the cockpit, which, by the way, is optional. You can turn this off if you want to be super hardcore and don't want any help at all. You can remove the highlight in the options, but right now it's currently on, so it's showing us exactly what the highlighted step is trying to tell you. So it wants us to put the AC or I'm sorry, the ASCS. This is the automatic stabilization system. We put it in fly-by-wire, and you can see it auto checks that procedure step. This again can be controlled in the options. You can choose to not have an auto checklist or to auto check a step so that it doesn't skip over things. But right now, it will auto complete when I flip the switch. So now it wants us to put this thing in auto, and then I can click on that, and then it completes and clears the checklist. My favorite part about this is you can stack all of the checklists on top of each other in order. So I want to do the T-minus 90. So boom, that has been run. That is now queued up, but I also want to go through the T-minus 40 and T-minus 20 checklists. So what that has now done is it has put all three of those checklists queued up on the top bit, and as you work through it, you will reach each checklist. So this is really nice, for example, before blast off. So before your launch, if you want to do the 20, 10, and 5-minute checks, or within the last 5 minutes, you can set up your ascent into separation and then orbit checklists, so you have them all ready to go, so you're not fumbling through this during the action. Now, emergency procedures are here also. The only thing with the emergency ones I noticed is that these you can't run. So these you have to leave up, or have them, like I said, either physically in your hand or off screen, or on another screen rather. So these checklists are here, but these ones you can't run through in the same way. You have to actually go through them. But these are all of the emergency procedures, and they're grouped into phase of flight, and it covers pretty much everything that you can think of. So here is all of this is on launch and ascent. This is all of the abort scenarios. So how do you abort the flight before you reach space? Is it prior to the tower jettison? Is it after the tower jettison? A couple of different steps. What if the tower fails to jettison? What if the capsule fails to separate from the booster? So those are all covered, and then you would run through those. Of course, emergency procedures, these are ones that you should really know by heart. And then you're looking at this to second check yourself after you've completed actions, or at least know where to go. So yeah, so that's how the checklist system works in this game. So you can see I'm plugging the batteries in here, and it is clicking through them all there. Now it's going to have us go through and put all of the fuses into position 1. I'm left clicking in order to push buttons in or move switches to the left. If you right click, it moves them to the right. Or right clicking pulls out a control or moves the rocker switch in the opposite direction. So here, all of the fuses, there's 2 fuses per switch here, making these 3 position rocker switches. Center position is off. If it's down, you're on fuse number 2. And if it's up, you're in fuse number 1. The 2 fuses are done for redundancy and safety. So if you have a fuse fail and a system shut off, you switch to fuse number 2 to see if it's just a fuse problem. If it powers back up, then you've solved the problem and you know that you're on the backup fuse. If that doesn't solve the problem, then you know that it's a separate issue. So that's part of your troubleshooting steps, is checking the positions on these. But that's how the clicking works. Oh, sorry. There we go. Let's turn the lights on now that I have all the batteries turned in. Or turned on, rather. So this would continue. You've got guards, button guards that you would left click to remove and then right click to put back on. We've got a couple of buttons that are guarded. These are usually actions that are only performed once, so you don't want to accidentally bump them, because then you can't undo the action. So they put covers on them. We have some of these pull rings here. So left click would pull the ring, whereas right would put it back in. And these, again, are for one-time actions. So on Reentry, for example, as you're coming down through 25 or 20,000 feet here, pull out the snorkel to start letting air into the cabin. That's an action that you do once, and then it's out. With knobs, right-click goes clockwise, as you might imagine, and then left-click goes counterclockwise. So that all makes sense. And again, right-clicking on the toggle switches sends them to the right, and left goes left. So it all makes sense. It's quite easy to interact with all these switches in the game. Everything kind of makes sense. Here's a good example of certain items on the checklists that do require a manual check, because there is no switch position that can be recorded by the game. So we get to this point where it needs us to make sure that these guards are installed. So it tells us that the fire retro push button, the guard should be installed. So here's the fire retro, and yes, the guard is installed. So you would check that. Same thing with the jettison retro, you would check that. Now you'll notice what happened there is that a bunch of these positions, it was able to detect that they were correct, so that just skipped over about 8 steps. So if you were running a physical checklist, you would obviously go line by line. If you would prefer to have this checklist do that, you can go to options and set that to be an option. Okay, so here we are back on the main menu. If we take a look at the settings real quick, here are your control inputs settings, and default is mouse and keyboard, but it's very simple to set up any other controllers to be able to use. So, for example, I've got my joystick and my rudder pedals installed. So no harder than setting up controls for any other space or flight sim that I've encountered before. So pretty easy. Realism settings has a bunch of interesting items here. So here's the switch highlighter that I spoke about before. You can turn that off, so you will not get any lighted indications of where the switch is if you want to be a little more hardcore about it. Also, the auto proceed checklist. This is where if you run a checklist, the guide will automatically skip over any step that does not require your attention. So it'll just skip and skip until it reaches something that you actually have to change. So you can turn that off as well if you want to check each step line by line to confirm that switches are in their correct position, like you would on a real checklist. Here's where your failures are. So you can set up failures for each of the 3 programs. So Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. And this enables random failures in missions for missions that allow this. So that's free play or custom missions. So you can't have additional failures in scripted missions like either the historicals or the scenario missions. So those are immune because they have their own failures programmed in sometimes. But for the random failures, you input a percentage, and then you choose which systems are eligible to fail, and this can range from something as small as the clock start not working, very easily fixable, to something much more catastrophic like oxygen system or your fuel system having issues, or your electrical system failing. So all of those are much more dire situations, but any of those, if you have them all on, any of them could be potentially affected and you don't know which one. With the percentage chance here, from 1 to 100, the random failure system will roll a dice once every 2 to 5 minutes. That's one cycle, where a random failure will have a chance of happening. So this 1% chance with everything highlighted means that every 2 to 5 minutes, there's a 1% chance that any one of the systems will fail. And then you can adjust that to taste if you want it from 1 to 100%. How likely is it that every 2 to 5 minutes you're going to get a failure? here's where you opt into the various alpha features. So these are features and game modes that are currently in alpha or in development. And this is where the multiplayer stuff comes in. So there's multiplayer Mercury, or Mission Control Mercury, Mission Control Apollo, a challenges game mode. If you're using VR and not just track IR, if you're doing full VR, you can turn that on here. And then I guess the in-game workshop, or not in-game, but the Steam workshop, which I should opt into that because that might have some interesting stuff in it. So yeah, so that's those. So the multiplayer, once you do have that selected and then restart the game, you now have a mission control option that comes up. So if we launch it, it now brings us into mission control, and you can either join by an invite code or you can look for public games. You can travel directly to the Discord server from here to look for groups. But if you X out up here, this just puts us into the control room, and this gives us a nice little look at the empty control room here. I'm just doing WASD and mouse control with the center mouse button to be able to look around and then walk. So yeah, so this would be the Mercury mission control. And again, this being a work in progress, this is certainly, it's a little jumpy and a little janky. It doesn't look like you can sit in the seats yet, but you can see that there are all of the various department stations up. So here's the flight director station. You have environment down here. Here's the flight surgeon, support control coordinator. So you've got the different jobs up. Capsule communicator. The big board up top is showing countdown timer, all of our times, in fact. So Greenwich Mean, that's Zulu time. How many, what number of orbits they're on, elapsed time. And then also looks to be giving a status board on each of the communication stations. So each radio station had its own 3-letter identifier, and the capsule would pass in and out of each of those stations, and then would either talk directly, it seems like, to directors at that station, or could be relayed back here to mission control itself. Above us, above and behind, is the viewing room, and we can actually visit there if we leave out of the control room. We do have a few hallways here, which is interesting. Here's the simulator room. So there actually is a mock-up of the capsule in here. I don't know if you can get in it. Can I get in it? Oh, I can. Oh, let me get in it. Interesting. It's not quite set up. Yeah, it's not set up like the in-game one, but it at least lets you look at stuff. So I guess, you could be like Gary Sinise here, running through switches and, being able to look at the same thing that the pilot is looking at. If you had an emergency up there, you could then communicate with them and maybe tell them exactly where to look or something like that. But yeah, that's just kind of neat. So the simulator room. And then here's the viewing room, which is just kind of a neat setup. So again, I don't know how any of this actually works in practice. I have not experimented at all with multiplayer, but so I can't tell you much more about it other than just what I'm showing you here. But it is neat that they have recreated the mission control rooms just from a historical experience perspective. It's just neat to be able to kind of walk around in these spaces and be able to see what things look like. So yeah, so that's sort of multiplayer in a nutshell. That brings us, as near as I can tell, to the end of this basic overview of Reentry. Like I said at the beginning, if this is your preferred genre of game, then you're probably already aware of this game, and you're probably aware of any of the other games that came before it that maybe you would compare it to. And I have no opinions on that one way or the other. This game, I just know that I like a lot. and I was excited to finally get my hands on it and to be able to check it out. And so if you like it, if it's something that you would enjoy, it's easily attainable on Steam for a reasonable price. And it is currently an alpha, but the alpha version is 0.99.3 at this point. So you can't get too much closer to version 1.0 to the actual production version being out than this. So not too much longer, and the game will be officially released with all of the intended features, installed. And then it'll go from there, I'm sure, and continue to be refined. It is a single developer game again, sort of like Starship Sim when I was talking about that game. So it's one guy doing all the work. So he's working at the pace that he can work at and getting things done as best he can. So it has been an alpha for a long time, for a bunch of years now, but clearly I'm discovering it and coming into it at just the right time because it is about to go live in its final state. So that's quite cool. So with this introduction to the game complete, all of the videos following this in the series are going to be flying through all of the historical missions. So again, that's what I am really excited about, and I hope that you find that exciting too, and maybe you'll join me over there for those flights. Thank you so much for joining me once again, and I will see you soon.